Welcome back to our discussion, the intersection of cybersecurity and intelligent automation, sponsored by KPMG here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM, federalnewsradio.com. My guests today are Leo Scanlon, the Senior Advisor for Healthcare and Public Sector Cybersecurity in the CIO Office of Health and Human Services, Dr. Ray Latier, the Chief of the Cybersecurity Division at the United States Marine Corps, and Tony Hubbard, Principal at KPMG. I'm your host, Tom Temin. And before the break, we were talking about the executive order from the Trump administration that took up many of the themes, frankly, that were from the Obama administration, which I guess is easy to deal with for federal agencies and contractors. But Ray, you were saying it expanded the definition of what we consider an IT system. Let's elaborate on that a little bit more, because I think it gets us into the next whole round here.
Good point. The executive order took a lot of things that had been kicked around for quite some time, actually, not even back to the Bush administration, but we just could not get people to move out on it. And so we've had this undercurrent for the longest time. How am I going to take and measure? How am I going to take a report? How far up does reporting go? So putting this together has now given us some pretty intensive tasks and goals. The one thing I noticed as I was looking through the constructs of how to do actual measures and how to take and do the reports, and I have to report as the accreditor what were the risk decisions I made and why, there was one part that jumped out at me was the definition of information technology. For the longest time in Title 40, Title 44, it had a very specific definition. It kind of sounded like your office automation system. It's things that you would process information and send data, and it was pretty much what we thought was going to be in the business office. There was a subtle difference in that terms of operational technology, but out in the industry with the industrial control systems and SCADA and health systems, actually had a different definition that actually related to providing a physical function or causing a physical reaction, an opening and a closing of a switch. That showed there were two fields. In some cases, we'd see people that would just kind of ignore the OT, focus on the IT. The executive order changed that. It said IT definition now includes these physical functions. I think what they're trying to do is, which in my opinion we should have done 20, 30 years ago, was get to the point where if it's hardware, software, firmware, an application, IP address, start documenting it. If the control is two or three of them, document it. And that's starting to pull it together. There's been a lot of discussions now in the Marine Corps and in the DoD of where we're going to go on this and how is it going to be measured as it ties into the automation part that we're talking about that I know that we're doing. Some of the tools we're working with the network access control device that we've selected as part of our NACR program, the network access control compliance and reporting tool. It will actually work with these devices. So now I have a way to actually start reaching down into the ICS and SCADA parts per what the executive order wants me to do to kind of monitor it, track it, identify it, put some type of approval process on us and say, yep, I've seen it, I know what it's doing, and give them authorization.
So this really brings almost the idea of the Internet of Things into the umbrella here.
Absolutely, because we had, as I said, it was always been a lexicon discussion. But when I was first into this job, first working as a contractor, I was at a Navy organization, and I was doing an assessment on a submarine. And then on the back of the submarine, they had a thing called a towed array. And it's a real long antenna with a bulb on it, but it connects into, at the time, a Unix system. It was a keyboard, it had a hard drive, it had a screen, it even had a printer on the side. And I said, well, we probably need to look at this and include this. And they went, no, that's not an information system. That's part of our weapon system. That's our measurement system. So the lexicon of people trying to take in color with something else to avoid doing the work, I think is now getting taken away. For people like me, it's going to be a little bit more work. But I think if we approach it smartly and calm people's minds, is we're not going to have you do, the 7,000 controls or 750 or whatever they have. There are certain aspects of controls that you only have to focus on. There are inherited aspects too in the environment that they're in. So let's take credit for that as well. That may cause the fear factor to go down, but like everything in government, there's a documentation aspect of this. And that's why we use a kind of enterprise governance and risk compliance tool as the repository where this stuff will go in an automated fashion, get ported up to us, and we can expose that to the DoD, we can expose it to other agencies as they need to. It's going to be a lot of work, but from the Marine Corps' perspective, I think we're farther along than what we expected when we saw that EO.
Okay, and Leo, at HHS, we've been talking about CMS, but there are other big parts of HHS that do operate medical systems. They're hospitals. They're right here locally.
Yes, and we have the Indian Health Service, which is the third largest health providing system in the country, and very, very underfunded and struggling to meet what most of the sector is, to figure out how do we incorporate this definition, redefinition of IT device is very important because it applies to medical devices just as well. And in fact, in most environments, medical devices have not been considered IT up until now. They're not even run by the CIO or the IT shop in a hospital or practice. They're considered a syringe, a Band-Aid, a pacemaker. It's
almost
a device.
The way a copier or a fax machine
Well,
is often facilities.
ironically,
and not
we've sort
IT.
of figured out that copiers are IT machines after
that when
people
we got
walked away
down
with the disk drives and a couple of embarrassing incidents.
Right.
But definitely the medical devices, this is a very big challenge. Programmatically and organizationally to incorporate them into that. The other part of the EO, though, that I did want to mention, which I think is very important, is that it clearly identifies that the responsibility for cybersecurity in a federal agency is with the agency head. This is a very simple thing. You would say, well, isn't that obvious? Well, it actually isn't until you get a clearly stated rule that tells everybody, now here's the deal. And we've got that in the EO, and I think it's going to give us a great leg up. It's going to give agency heads, incoming new political heads of agencies, clear guidance that lets them understand this is the job. And that's going to be very big. It's going to help move all of the initiatives that we're talking about forward and accelerate them in a very important way.
All right. And Tony, again, across government, do you see the whole SCADA and Internet of Things domain coming into the CIO and cybersecurity domain?
Well, certainly from an executive order perspective, I was also encouraged. Well, first off, I want to follow what Leo mentioned around the accountability issue. Just as a dovetail, last year KPMG did a survey with ISC Squared of senior government executives, and one of the common themes that came out of that survey was the lack of accountability around cybersecurity agencies, and I think that's been a lingering issue, and I think the fact that it was highlighted, as Leo mentioned, in the executive order is very positive. But I think, to your point around industrial control systems, we've already talked a little bit about that, and I think that because that is such a critical concern, and the fact that the executive order specifically called out energy and defense as two critical infrastructure elements, and I guess now election systems as well, is going to get more attention. But I think that's positive because you've seen so many global scale attacks, notably in other countries, on energy and power grids, and I think that's certainly a concern that we have as well. So I think the focus there was really good. And we talked earlier about the focus on the cloud, and I think that the impact or the focus of the executive order on modernization and movement to cloud and standardization, I think, is good. But of course, that's going to bring up some of the issues we talked about earlier around third-party risks and how you manage that from a cyber perspective. So I think overall, consistent with the same themes that Ray and Leo mentioned, follow on. The executive order is really a follow-on of other themes that have been out there for a while. But I think any of that, for those of us that work in the cybersecurity industry, I think any of those kind of key themes that continue to resonate is a positive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so building toward this idea of the need for greater automation, there's another component in here that we are going to talk about now, and that is tools and the many tools. And you've heard every CIO say, I've got more tools than I can shake a stick at. So tell us about the tool sets, in generic terms, that you are using, that you are finding useful, and more importantly, how they interact with one another, and what the governance structures in place are for selection of the tools used to monitor and otherwise control cybersecurity.
Well, for the Marine Corps, we have an approach where we try to do an evaluation of what is the cybersecurity capability that I need to execute. And we know those related a lot of times, of course, to the controls, and the CNSS 1253 or the 853 controls. I've got to be able to do this aspect for auditing. I have to do this part for individual access. From there, I have to take and derive what functionalities do I need to execute to do that. And then, and only then, do I start looking at tools. To do it the other way, and this does happen a lot with a lot of federal organizations, they get what I call the shiny object syndrome issue, or the silver spoon from Alice in Wonderland with the mad hair, is that they get focused on that one thing, and they're realizing they're trying to make it fit back into, well, I'll make it fit to a requirement. we've got to do the other way around. So we have been doing this capability aspect first and trying to find if we have certain tools that maybe does 80% of it, and I have another tool that maybe I'll do 20% of it, I can put them both together to justify if I have one that does 50 and 50. So it's not necessarily always a single tool. You know, one thing does not always, you know, solve all problems, but it gives me more justification that I can start reducing the number of similar tools and similar capabilities to something that's a little bit more manageable. It's not a Swiss Army knife per se, but it is a tool belt construct and allows me to kind of select what I've got. Absolutely, you know, we're looking at the end devices. How do I take and monitor what is the status of the end device? I think our the DoD's Comply to Connect and Marine Corps' NACRA implementation of that is going to help us to do that. Now I can look at the end devices. How's the information going to be ported up? Do I send data up to say, here's my independent report? Or rather, do I expose the status in a web capability, so now you can see it. I'm not pushing something across the line, so I'm reducing, you know, transmission problems, I'm reducing issues of extra storage. So we're looking at that particular aspect. We have, as I said, an enterprise governance and risk compliance tool, which is our central repository that works with our SEAM products, with our provider at the Marine Corps Cyber Operations Group at Quantico. So we can say, here's where we can start to expose it. Here's where we can start to do some analysis. We have our major center, our Marine Corps Enterprise data center out of Kansas City, where that's where a lot of the repository is going into that big data environment, where our application development and operations construct will go there as we start trying to move things away from hardware, software, firmware, and get into the software applications, which really are what we're looking at, and see if we can get off of, again, the various different tools. So in this approach, we're trying to be as innovative as we possibly can be. And I heard Leo talk a couple times about the funding shortfalls. Believe me, we understand funding shortfalls too, because for the longest time, you know, it's been really tight. We just got a little bit of a windfall in the DoD, and we're trying to find ways. How can we do that and still meet contractual laws? That's been another issue on this too. Is that our agility in contracts to respond to something new? It's really hard. And when you have his issues of 27-year-old updates for your, I mean, that's the industry standard, right? It gets as hard as how do we take and manage for that? How do we plan for that? How do I adjust for it? My generals told me, find a way to track Internet of Things. Find the tools that will do it. Find the way to expose it. Find the way to take and make sure that they're protected in some way, and find a way to have that transparent up to him, for cyber, and ultimately to the agency head for us, which is the Commandant.
Okay, and Leo, and on the civilian side, what does the tool situation look like and the
Very
data
similar
that
to
it produces?
Pardon me, what Ray was describing, we are, like the last point he made, we've been operating almost 10 years now with no real budget. That is, we're going CR to CR to CR, which makes planning extremely difficult, especially when you're talking about the speed with which technology is moving. It's very easy to get caught with a bunch of shelfware just because you don't have the flexibility to respond to it in a way that you would want to. So we have a secondary challenge related to that at HHS, which is the federated nature of the organization and different risk tolerances for different organizations. So the National Institutes of Health is in the business of making data available to the public, to researchers globally. They have a different calibration of what they want to be going out and flowing out and how fast than, say, CMS, which is protecting financial and other information, patient information, PII, PHI, where they have no tolerance for stuff leaving their network. This puts a tool challenge in place. What tool do you use to protect the data in those different circumstances? And as you've noted, the typical problem is shelfware builds up, and then what do you do? So we've taken an approach of looking at our infrastructure, and we did an enterprise-wide view of what do we need that would support an array of tools appropriate to different business missions. And the key elements really are the risk compliance tool that Ray mentioned, number one. This is the place where information is aggregated, viewed, and turned into risk state view for senior managers. But under that, we've got a common data aggregation environment, and we have two different but related threat detection environments that extend across the enterprise and allow us then to build something that we've just instantiated, which is a healthcare Cybersecurity Communications Integration Center, modeled on the DHS National Cybersecurity Communications Integration Center, where we are able to take the threat information that we're pulling off that infrastructure, plus the data that's available from the tools, and then turn that into actionable material that can be used back by our operating divisions and by our partners. For example, we share with the DoD through DHA and VA. We have a sharing environment to share these threat indicators. So we've used the infrastructure to put in place the ability to share data, and we're not so fixated on the tool above that. We're really concentrating on what is the data and can we turn that into actionable information, threat information that can go back out to such things, the automated information sharing program that the DHS is running that we're participating in, as is other federal agencies. So this is how we're taking that challenge. We're looking for the infrastructure, the data flow, and then we're treating the tools as something that can plug and play. We're not going to get tied to them. And we've asked our infrastructure partners to be part of this vision. We joke that we pull them together and it's the 5 families. And we say, you guys are going to work together with this vision. And that's been very, very successful for us so far, and we hope that it's going to set us up for success in the future.
All right, so you're meeting in Washington instead of upstate New York on this particular get-together. Right. On that note, we're going to take a short break. My guests today are Tony Hubbard, principal at KPMG. Dr. Ray Latier is the chief of the Cybersecurity Division at the United States Marine Corps. Leo Scanlon is Senior Advisor for Healthcare and Public Health Sector Cybersecurity in the Office of the CIO at Health and Human Services. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. Our discussion is the intersection of cybersecurity and intelligent automation, sponsored by KPMG, here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.